I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
I'm a chemical engineer
Wow.
and a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University. I was a student and I was drafted right before I graduated. I was drafted. I still had to take a few courses, so I did not get my degree until after I was discharged from the Army. When I was drafted, I went through basic training, of course, which was not easy, and we had very definitive tests that we took, and because of the scores that two of us made on the tests, we were rated very highly, and we had the opportunity to go to a higher level, but it wasn't officers training school, but it was something more elaborate than just being a regular soldier. And we would be serving in the United States, but we would have to serve 3 years instead of 2. So I signed up for that, and my other very good friend Eugene Stanley signed up for it. And after about a week, I told our sergeant that I changed my mind and I did not want to have to serve 3 years. So he said, okay, but it's too late to be assigned in your duty for this week. You'll have to wait till next week. And Stanley always followed what I said. So he was not college educated, so he sort of looked up at me, to me, I guess, for what to do. Well, the assignments came out, and Eugene Stanley and I, had we not gone through this, we would have been sent to Paris, France, and to the little duchy between Yugoslavia and Italy. What's the name of it? I can't think of it now. But I said to Stanley, well, don't worry, our assignments next week that we get assigned will be just as well, just as good. And so the assignments came out the following week, and they were all from top to bottom, all FECOM. FECOM, that was how you pronounce FECOM, which stands for Far East Command. I said, okay, Stanley, we're not going to be going to Western Europe. We'll be going to the Far East. I said, but that does not mean that we're going to the Korean War. Don't worry about it. And I said, where do you think we're going? Well, we were assigned to go to the state of Washington outside of Seattle. Can't remember the port. And we were going to ship out of there. And he was worried about going to that part of the world. And I said, well, don't worry, Stanley. We're probably going to Hawaii. Well, Hawaii was not a state then. It was an island that was owned and occupied by both Asian and few American people. And I said, we'll probably be going to Hawaii Islands. And so we then shipped out on a troop ship, and we took the northern route, and I realized then that we were not going to go to the Hawaiian Islands, and that was a little bit disappointing. And many years later I did make it to Hawaii, but that was as a civilian, not as an Army person. So I said, well, okay, we'll see where we're going. And we took the northern route up off of Alaska, and it was extremely rough and very, very cold. And everybody was seasick, and we were all covered with throw up because everybody just threw up on everybody else. and it was a very unpleasant trip. That's to put it mildly. But I said, well, Stanley, we weren't going to Hawaii, but we're probably going to Japan. Japan's a nice place. Don't worry about it. And so our troop ship sailed, and it went past Japan, and it sailed into the port of Busan, which is a southern city in South Korea. And I said, well, Stanley, don't worry. We'll probably be assigned right here in this part of Korea, and some of these other guys will be sent up toward the front. And so we got off the ship in Busan and shipped into one end of the town and out the other, and they put us on this railroad. And it was the worst railroad I have ever been on. And we sailed on this railroad for about a day and a half. And we had a very bad experience. When we got up toward the mountains, we would go through these tunnels. And the smoke from the engine that was pulling this train would practically suffocate us. So I learned after the first tunnel that we had that when we saw another tunnel coming, I said, come on, we got to close the windows, and it wouldn't be as bad as we tried to breathe going through those tunnels. And we got up to outside of Seoul. We didn't know how to pronounce it then. We thought it was Seoul. And I said, well, Stanley, this is probably as far as we're going. And after a day spent there in Seoul, we shipped out and we went on different trips. So Stanley and I parted at that particular time. And while I remember his name, I don't think I ever saw him again. But I ended up going up into the Punch Bowl area in eastern Korea. He was over, I think, further on the East Coast than I was. And we spent probably about the next 6 months we're requesting airstrikes and bringing in what was called TOTs. TOT stands for time over target. And we were on a team of either 5 or 6 men that operated these radios 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You never went off the air. And of course, radio was a relatively new thing back then. That was the only method of communication from point A to point B. So it was tough when you had to be up at night keeping the radio on, and you took turns doing the different 8-hour shifts. We served in this little van or truck or whatever you would call it, a van. I guess it was pulled by a truck actually, and it had all the radio communications equipment in it. And when we used to request airstrikes where the Korean divisions were in trouble, and we would then sometimes, not always, but sometimes get TOTs, which would be time over targets, and we would get those about 4 or 5 hours before the airstrike was due to come, and we would have to run these TOTs over to an Air Force officer who was nearby to provide him with this knowledge, and he would then go up the mountain or hill, whatever you want to call it, and with 1 or 2 servicemen and Air Force regular, not officers, just regular troops, whatever they were called, and and they helped bring in the airplanes. They would be on radio communications with them and help guiding them in to the target. And as a result, over those 6 months, I guess this was going on during the war before there was a ceasefire, and we probably, through this team effort, we probably killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Chinese and North Koreans, but they were mostly Chinese. The North Koreans had been pretty badly beaten when the Americans came over there and helped the South Koreans defend themselves against the North Koreans. I served with 3 Korean divisions, and I can still remember it was the 11th Korean Division, the 20th Korean Division, and then the 3rd Korean Division. And I went temporary duty to the British Commonwealth Division, which is over near the West Coast, but that was just for a very short time. We all were draftees, and we all did what we needed to do. We were all relatively, we're all radio trained people because we had a high test scores, I guess, when we were drafted, and I think we all did a good job. Maybe a lot of people that were drafted were not happy in doing their job, whatever they were, but we were assigned a very high-level, intelligent duty to perform, and we all took it very seriously and did it well. And I think we can be proud of that, all 5 of us. Negotiations were going on to stop the war, and they reached a point where they called a ceasefire. And we had this interesting debate among our 5 team members about how long this ceasefire would last. A couple of us thought it would only be 24 hours, 48 hours, a day or 2. The more optimistic guys thought it might last for 5 or 6 days, and maybe even a week, but that was pretty optimistic. And the interesting thing now is that, 60-some years later, we're still in a ceasefire. There has never been a truce on paper written, and technically we're still at war with the North Korea. And it's a very sad thing that it's happened that way. And most Americans do not realize that technically we're still at war against North Korea. We only had an American officer, come up from south, many miles south, and give us our monthly paycheck and mail. We got mail once a month. And he would bring up the mail once a month, give us our paycheck, whatever part of it we took. Most of it was sent home because there was no place to spend money. You couldn't use it much, but you got a few dollars to spend over at KMAG. That was Korean Military Advisory Group. That was a very small contingent of American military people that supported and advised the Korean divisions. I think we had pretty good morale. I took a very big risk. We had this corporal who was in charge of us, who was a regular. He was not a draftee. He was a regular Army man, but he was what I considered a good-for-nothing. Excuse the term. And he never did anything, and he was a boozer, and he had a way of getting money to buy booze. And he would take off with the truck and go down into South Korea and come back with booze. And when our monthly visit from an officer came up, and one time for some reason, I decided he wanted to know where our leader was, and I said, "Oh, he's been gone for a day or two." He said, "Oh, why is that? I said, "Well, it's no problem." He said, "What do you mean it's no problem?" I said, "Well, he doesn't do anything." He said, "What do you mean he doesn't do anything?" I said, "Well, he doesn't operate any equipment here, and he doesn't even know how to do it." And I made a big decision, which I regretted later, and I said, "You know what?" I said, "You know that radio transmitter that he said was stolen?" The officer said, "Yes." I said, "That wasn't stolen. He sold it. He sold it to the Koreans to get booze." This lieutenant looked at me very seriously for about 60 seconds, and he said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yes." He said, he thought about it a while. He said, "You stay here. I'm going to interview all the other team members individually." And he interviewed every one of the other 4 or 5 men. And I thought, why didn't I keep my mouth shut? Why did I ever say that? That was a dumb mistake. I'm in big trouble. So when he left, he looked at me very seriously, pointed his finger at me. He says, "Okay, you'll be hearing from me." I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble now. I should have shut up. And later, when our regular Army man came back, he said, I just had a transmission. You have to go back down to the company headquarters down south. And so he took off, and I thought, well, this is going to be trouble. And then an Army Reserve guy came up and said, "I'm here to take over the team temporarily." The guy who had been our team chief got court-martialed and ended up being busted to a basic private. And I ended up, after about a month, I ended up becoming team chief. And so it's sort of interesting. It turned out okay, but I sort of regretted for a while that I made the decision that I did. And but we had a lot of good regular Army servicemen, but that one guy that I got court-martialed was not, unfortunately, one of them. And I found out later that he had been busted before and had a very bad record with the Army. Well, we were all drafted for 2 years, so it was always 2 years. And we were always excited to get out. And when we did get out and came back shipped back to the United States, everybody on that troop ship was interviewed by an officer because they were looking for people who they could recruit to stay in the Army because they needed people and they wanted good people. And so we were all interviewed individually. And we had a big lineup, and there was an officer interviewing each one of us. And when I got up to the head of the line, he looked at me, he said, "Okay, Harry," he called me, what do you plan to do if you're discharged now?" I said, "Well, I'm going to go back and for 1 semester and get my college degree and become a chemical engineer." And he turned around and says, "Okay, next." He would interview some people right a long time, but you know, when he got to me, he knew he wasn't going to waste his time. He knew what he was doing. I felt sorry for the Vietnam veterans who were coming back because they were not treated the way we were. We were treated with very high respect. And it's sort of interesting. I have to think about the United States history from then on. I thought that during the war and immediately after the war that we should never have been in Korea. That was, I thought, a huge mistake. As I look back upon it now, 60 years, some years later, it was the last war that we should have been in, because that's the last war that turned out well after, of course, the big Second World War. Every war that we participated in since the Korean War, we really lost. And it's a shame that we spent millions and billions of dollars sending our troops and draftees over to those countries to fight in a war that really didn't achieve what we wanted to achieve. And I hope that future generations do not get involved in wars in foreign lands. And as I said before, there hasn't been one that's worked out since Korea, and so why do it? Why should we get involved with other parts of the world? You make the best decision you can at the time. Don't make quick decisions. Try to use your brain power and analyze everything, and make your best decision. When it doesn't turn out quite right, you just make the necessary adjustment and go on with life the best way you know how. And be careful, don't ever do anything that's going to injure your fellow man.